I'm Dave Michaels. I'm the CTO, one of the founding partners here at Leading Edge. We are a local custom app dev consulting company. As the name implies, we focus on leading edge technologies. We have basically a team here of around 50 folks that are primarily software developers. And as we focus on leading edge technologies, AWS is obviously one of the most leading edge technologies on the planet right now. So it fits into our space really well. As such, we've been working with our clients for a little over 2 years, would you say, on the platform, various different clients in various different contexts. And since we started working on the platform, we just got involved. We thought it was a great thing to continue our involvement. So we are AWS partners. And along with the partnership, there comes requirements. And as part of those requirements, we are required to have a certain number of certified professionals on staff. And hence Andrew's talk tonight regarding certifications, what's out there, and what's what your options are and what your program entails. If this type of technology is something that's really interesting to you and you'd like to ideally work in and do more with it, you want to learn more about us, go see Larry Rickard in the back raising his hand. He'd be more than happy to talk to you about any of this stuff and what we do and what we're all about if you haven't talked to anyone else on our team here today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Andrew May, and he'll do his own introduction about his credentials and why he has the chops to actually talk about this stuff.
So apologies in advance, I'm probably going to cough my way through this. We had to reschedule because I had the flu and I've got a lingering cough after that. I'd like to say apologies from Angelo, who organizes the meetup. He wasn't able to make it tonight because he's at a conference today. So he's always looking for people who want to present at the meetup and locations to host the meetup. So if you have any ideas, I've got some of his business cards and you can contact him. I can give you his details later. So we're going to talk about AWS certifications, but first a bit about me. So I'm Senior Solutions Architect and Cloud Lead with Leading Edge. I've been a Java developer for a long time, but I've been using AWS for about 2.5 years. I've currently got 3 certifications. They're listed here as Cloud Practitioner, Developer, and Solutions Architect, but actually I took them in a different order than that. I started with the Solutions Architect, and then I later took the Cloud Practitioner and Developer ones, mostly because of my Cloud Lead role, that I wanted to evaluate those certifications for other people within our organization. And as you can see, I've got fancy digital badges that you get when you get certified. So we're going to talk a bit about why you might get certified, the different certifications that are available and how they map together, some details, how you prepare for the exam, and then just a short mention of how that fits into the partner network. So one of the big reasons for getting certified is it's just to record what you've learned about AWS in the time that you've been using the platform. For me, I'd been using it for about 2 years before I got my Solutions Architect Associate certification. And I had to study for it, but a lot of the information I'd already picked up from the time I'd worked in the platform. So it can be a useful record to say, well, I know this about AWS. Now, from the other perspective, perhaps you're new to AWS and you want to learn more about it. So studying for certification is also a great way to learn about the platform. I'd say especially that's true of things like the Cloud Practitioner and Developer levels, where you, especially if you take some of the hands-on training that's available from various people, you can learn a lot about AWS as you study for that certification. It can be your introduction to the platform. And of course, it looks great on your resume. A lot of people get certified because, again, part of that, it's a record of what you know. And I come from a Java background. I didn't have a great deal of respect for Java certifications. I'm not entirely sure why, but they always seemed like not that useful. I was more interested in hands-on experience. But if I see that someone's AWS certified, at least perhaps because it's a sort of fairly new technology, I give that at least some credence. So at the moment, there's a bunch of different certifications available, and this is kind of how AWS puts their roadmap together. They've got different diagrams that show this in different ways, but here they've got the idea of the foundational level, which they just put Cloud Practitioner 4 times. And then at the associate level, there's 3 different certifications. There's Solutions Architect, Developer, and SysOps Administrator. And then professional, there's 2 different options. There's the Professional Solutions Architect that we would typically take after you've had the Associate Solutions Architect for a while, or there's the DevOps Engineer Professional that they recommend if you're coming either from the Developer Associate or the SysOps Administrator Associate. In addition to that, they have a couple of specialty certifications. There's one for big data, and there's one for networking. And they've also got in beta one for security. So the certifications themselves, they expire after 2 years. So you can choose to renew your certification, and actually it's a little cheaper if you renew the certification when you take the exam, or you can choose to move up to one of the professional certifications. Now, with, say, Solutions Architect, that's a fairly obvious progression. If you've taken the Solutions Architect Professional, why would you renew the Associate one? But if you're taking DevOps, I don't know whether it would still make sense to renew the Developer one or not. I think that would be a personal choice thing. So let's talk about the foundational levels. So these are kind of the lowest level. So I'm going with a balloon metaphor here, where this is the lowest level. So the Cloud Practitioner is pretty new. It was announced at reInvent last year, and it's a very much an introductory certification. It's recommended, in theory, for pretty much anyone, including non-technical folks. And we'll talk about whether I think that's really realistic or not. It covers some general cloud principles, which, let's face it, they're really just AWS principles. I mean, they describe it as being more generic than that, but actually it's really all about AWS. Talk about a range of AWS services, some information on security, support, and pricing. And unusually, they actually provide some free training for this that they reckon is sufficient for you to study and pass the exam. For all the other ones, they offer partnerships with other companies, pretty expensive training, or there's other online options. But in this case, they provided about 7 hours of online video. Now, each of the certifications has an exam guide that comes with it, and part of those exam guides is a breakdown. For the practitioner, it's kind of broken down into the cloud concepts, security, technology, which they put at about 1/3, and then billing and pricing, which is a small amount. And I think roughly this is kind of a guide to what proportion of the questions in the exam are going to be on any one particular area. And sometimes it's a little difficult to say with some of these which area a question belongs to anyway. But really what this is telling you is a lot of the questions are basically asking you to have some basic knowledge about the different services. Now, each certification has an exam guide that sort of explains what these different domains are, but it's kind of waffly and it's hard to actually understand what they really mean. But they also have some sample questions. Now, I've got some examples from the sample questions from each of the certifications in this slide deck, and most of them don't include any answers. So some of these are obvious. Some of the more advanced ones are less obvious, and I'm going to tell you what I think the answer is, but I'm not necessarily right. I think one of the examples does have the answers, but I'm more sort of wanting to demonstrate how the exam questions build and become more complicated as you move up the levels of the certifications. So starting in the Cloud Practitioner, the questions are very concise. Typically like one sentence for the question, and all the answers are pretty short. They're easy to read, they're quick. A lot of them you can answer them kind of in seconds. So in this case, it's basically a guess the service type question. So it's saying, well, you want to know who made an API call. it doesn't matter what the API call is, but if you know enough about AWS and you've listened to this, you'll know that the answer is B, it's CloudTrail. Interestingly, X-ray isn't even mentioned anywhere in the cloud practitioner training, so you probably eliminate that, because if that's all you've studied, you won't even know what X-ray is. But here's another example, a security one. This type of question you'll get in a lot of the associate questions in the different levels as well. It's talking about the shared responsibility model. And this is how you define what AWS is responsible for and what you're responsible for in the cloud. I'd say all of the associate level, in addition to the cloud practitioner, will have questions about this. And it's basically saying, where does Amazon's role end and your role begin? And in this case, it's saying what's AWS's responsibility. Sometimes they'll ask you to pick multiples, so like 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5. In this case, they're just asking 1. So basically, their responsibility is maintaining physical hardware. Obviously, we have no access to the AWS data centers. That's kind of the obvious answer here. The point is, all these other things are your responsibility. You're responsible for managing any custom AMIs you create or securing your own applications. So my impressions from taking this, and I took this after I'd already got the Solutions Architect certification, so I didn't really study a great deal for it. I did watch those videos more to evaluate them than anything and just to understand what was in them. But a lot of the questions were just this guess the service type of question. They're very sort of high level, basic bits of information. I would say if you're going to go on and take one of those associate certifications, skip Cloud Practitioner, because it's really not going to be worth a great deal on its own. I would also say that if you're in a non-technical role, a lot of the training kind of goes into more technical detail than I'd expect someone in sales or managerial roles to really care about. So for example, you watch the videos they provide, for each service, they'll talk a bit about the service, and that's fine. And then they'll log into the AWS console and show you how you stand up an auto-scaling group. And someone in sales doesn't really need to see that as an example. I would say it might be useful for those who work alongside people in technical roles, like project managers, where having a knowledge of the terminology and the different services might allow them to work closely with their developers and have a better understanding of the services that are being used. And like I said, the free training is a bit of a mixed bag. But there is some great information in the bonus materials about VPC designs that's way high level for Cloud Practitioner, but is actually quite useful information. You had a question?
Yeah, I watched some of those videos, and I noticed that I watched a lot of training videos in general, and I like the ones where you can like speed up the speed. Did I notice that that was not an option?
No, it's not. It's a pretty basic player. I also personally noticed that some of the topics seemed to be out of order, that they'd introduced something that assumed you'd watch the next video, and it was kind of a little weird. And they're all different presenters, and they have different styles and different volume levels, and it was pretty inconsistent. It wasn't great training, but it was free.
Okay.
This is on the online training?
This is on the free online training from awstraining.com.
Okay.
It's not bad as just an introduction. It doesn't cost you anything except your time. So moving on to the associate certifications, these are kind of where the meat is for a lot of people. So starting with the developer, recommends that you have about a year of AWS experience, but it's definitely not a requirement. Like I said, you can use studying for these certifications as a way to learn about the platform. Obviously, if you've got that experience already, then that's going to give you a head start in studying these. There's a definite focus on certain core AWS services, and this one hasn't been updated that recently, so the services aren't necessarily buzzwords like Lambda. It's a focus on things like EC2, and in particular DynamoDB and S3, but also things like SQS, SNS, Route 53, Beanstalk, IAM, even simple workflow that's basically a deprecated service. A little bit of CloudFormation, which might seem a little odd for developers. and then Elasticache. The only question I got about lambdas was which of these are languages you can use for a lambda. I suspect if they revise this, it will be very different. There'll be a lot of focus on lambdas, API gateway, and so on. But at the moment, there isn't. You are expected to have some knowledge of the SDKs, of which languages are SDKs available in, and also they'll tend to ask you some strange questions where they say, well, what's the name of the API call to list AMIs? It's like, well, you don't really expect to memorize the name of every API call in AWS because there's thousands of them. But if you've used enough of the SDK, you'll know that the method names in the SDK tend to map to the API names, so you may well know that in that case it's describe images. The breakdown here is a little bit small for you to read, but basically 40% on developing and designing, and 30% on deployment and security, and a little bit of the others. So here, again, the questions are fairly straightforward. This, I think, would fall into the designing and developing, and it's basically asking you about DynamoDB and how do you make sure that if two users are writing to a DynamoDB record at once, that they don't overwrite the other's changes. Because Dynamo is a NoSQL database, it doesn't have like all these ACID guarantees. So really what it's asking you is, do you understand DynamoDB's concurrency model? Because DynamoDB is like optimistic concurrency, and if you want to ensure that you don't overwrite someone else's changes, well, the answer is A, that you implement optimistic concurrency by using a conditional write. Because there's all these extra things. When you do an update, you can say, well, only update if this attribute is this value. So perhaps you have to implement your own counter, this like a version number, and you check against that version number. Is it the version that I fetched when I do the update? If not, I have to retry or whatever your option is. You kind of have to implement that for yourself. But under the hood, it's optimistic. Debugging, well, in this case, it's interesting because this is framed as a CloudFormation question, but it's really an AMI question. So it's asking why your CloudFormation template that worked in US East 1 didn't work in US West 2, well, US West 1. And then the first answer is here, well, the AMIs referenced in the template are not available in US West 1. So really, if you know that AMIs have different IDs in different regions, you'll know that that's the answer. And it's actually nothing to do with CloudFormation, it's just that you use a different AMI ID in different regions. Whereas the other things, well, hopefully you can create the same IAM role in different regions. They have the same sort of structure in each region. So my impression of taking this, and this was the last one I took it at the end of January, so I did Solutions Architect, Cloud Practitioner, and then Developer. And this one, I really didn't prepare a great deal for. I took the sample test, did well on it, thought, well, I'll just schedule it and take it and see how it goes. Most of the questions are about the details of specific services. So, you know, they're talking about individually, do you know about this service? It's not so much about combining services. Now, sometimes the questions can be a bit like that CloudFormation/AMI question, but essentially it's about knowing about these individual services. You will definitely need to know how to calculate read and write capacities for DynamoDB. You need to understand that formula of however many megabits, capacity units per second stuff, which I've already forgotten. You will also need to know how you optimize S3 keys for performance. I got 2 or 3 questions about that in the 50-odd questions in the exam, which essentially means hash them and start them with something random. You'll have to memorize which languages have an SDK, because you'll get asked that. And you'll get a few questions about some of these other services that you've probably never used and may never use, like Simple Workflow. Ultimately, if you don't know the answer to those, you can still pass the exam if you know all your stuff about EC2, DynamoDB, S3. But definitely I would say Elasticache and Route 53 are really important services. cloud formation from a DevOps perspective is huge. You will probably never use simple workflow on a new project because step functions have effectively replaced them. But if you just read the fact for it, then that's probably enough to answer any questions. Now, the solutions architect one, again, they recommend the same kind of level of experience, but ultimately, they also expect you to have experience in designing applications. To be an architect is kind of a prerequisite. Now, the new version of this exam has just been released in the last week or two. And until August the 12th, you can choose which version you take. When you book your exam, you can say whether you want to take the old version of it or whether you want to take the new February 2018 version. They recommend that if you're starting to study for it, you study for the new syllabus. But if you've already been studying for the old, preparing for the old exam, take the old exam, because otherwise you're going to get a whole bunch of questions about services you haven't studied. Now, the new version does definitely cover more modern services. The old version is kind of more fixed in 2-3 years ago, whenever it was last updated. I would say that the solutions architect in general covers a wider range of services than the developer. And in particular, it goes into services that developers may not really care about, particularly those involved in data migration or hybrid and more sort of enterprise technologies, things like storage gateway, which, unless you're particularly deploying that as a solution, the average developer is not going to have any involvement in that. And it's not really something you develop for, you just configure it and use it. There's more of a focus on how you combine different services, and in particular, there's also a focus on VPC design and security. Now, I've got two breakdowns here because they differ between the old and the new. Whether that actually means the contents of the exam particularly differ or not is debatable. It's hard to say because I don't know how much meaning there is in these breakdowns. The old one was 60% on highly available, cost-efficient, fault-tolerant, scalable systems, whatever the hell that meant. The new one splits it down a bit more into resilient architectures, performant architectures, secure architectures, and cost-optimized architectures, and things like that. Whether there's really any difference between those two, I don't know. I have heard someone say, and I don't know if this is true, that they tried to take some of the more developer-focused things out of the solutions architect exam so that it's less focused on the details of using individual services and more on the combining and choosing of services. But I can't say whether that's true or not. Now, a couple of questions I have here from the sample questions for the old exam. I didn't really have time to go back and try and see, well, do I like the ones from the old or the new? Here we start getting longer questions. This one, honestly, I looked at this and I had to do some research to try and figure out what the answer is. And even now, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly sure. Apparently, CloudFront, if you want to talk to an S3 bucket in a secure manner and don't want to make your S3 bucket public, there is something called an origin access identity for CloudFront, and the answer is A, that you can set up and grant that access to your S3 buckets. But it's a very specific answer here. You have to really have studied a bit about CloudFront to know the answers here. So you can see we're going into this sort of slightly deeper level of things. And the other answers here start to look a lot more credible than they do in some of the other exam questions. It's harder to eliminate some of the bad answers. Here again, you need to know a bit more. So in this case, it's asking about what happens to an EC2 instance in a VPC, and this actually differs if it's not in a VPC with an associated elastic IP, and you stop it and start it. And that's different from restarting it because they behave differently. And which two of these are the case? Now, I think here the answer is, well, all data on instance store devices will be lost, because that's always true. If you stop something with ephemeral storage, you lose all that storage. If you restart it, you don't. But if you stop it and start it, you do. And the underlying host for the instance has changed. Basically, if you stop something and start it again later, you've got no guarantee that it's going to be on the same physical hardware. All the others aren't true. You will still have your EBS, block storage. The elastic IP doesn't get disassociated if you're in a VPC, but it does if you're not in a VPC. So they start getting a bit sneaky with some of these questions. So it definitely expects you to have a deeper knowledge of the AWS services. You will have to know how to design a VPC. So you'll need to know the differences between public and private and VPN-only subnets and how you set all that up and the routing. Like I said, the wrong questions are harder to spot. I personally got a lot of questions about EBS. Someone else I know who took the exam got a lot of questions about S3. So it's all kind of randomized when you take the exam, so you can't quite be sure what the focus of what your question is going to be. Now the new exam, it's slightly more questions, 65 instead of 55. It's considerably longer they give you for it, 130 minutes instead of 80. Now, you can take these in a lot less time than that. You don't have to stay in the room or anything for them. So whether it really needs that much longer or not, or whether they're just being more generous, is hard to say. Perhaps they've made the questions more verbose, so they take longer to read. It's not quite clear. There's a different distribution of content, like in that exam guide, but we don't really know how much that affects things. You will be expected to know about lambdas, application load balancers, DynamoDB DEX, which is a caching layer for DynamoDB, SQS FIFO queues, Elastic File System, and a bunch of other newer services because they've updated the content to be more up-to-date and relevant. It might be more difficult based upon, I looked at the 8 Cloud Guru forums, so they have a lot of training. I looked at the forums for people who've taken that in the last couple of weeks or so that it's been released. And definitely a lot of people were saying they didn't do as well as they expected. They passed, but they weren't as happy with their grade as they thought they would be based upon the training they'd taken. But it could be they're just less familiar with some of these newer services and it's asking them questions about services they've never used as opposed to these more conventional services that everyone's used like EC2 and S3. And like I said, they recommend you take this if you haven't already started studying the old one. SysOps Administrator, I considered taking this one, but I took the practice test and decided against it. So you recommended again that 1 year of experience, but you definitely need more than that coming from a sort of operational background to be able to really understand the questions on this. Definitely an operational focus on deployment, configuration, monitoring, and security, and a lot of questions where you kind of have to choose, well, if I pick this many reserved instances and this many on demand, is that better cost-wise for this given scenario than picking this many spot instances, or those kind of questions. So you'll have to know something about those balances of costs. And then also things like IOPS limits, how do you choose different instance types for different levels of I/O performance. The breakdown here, it's kind of a lot more split down evenly. A lot of stuff about monitoring, HA, analysis, deployment, data management, security, and networking. An example exactly about that kind of thing, like IOPS. This one I had to look up, but I'm not 100% sure whether it's the right answer. But 100,000 4K IOPS is a lot. I don't think from my research that you can get that even with EBS provisioned IOPS. I think that tops up out around 30,000. So I think the answer is you go for one of these special high storage instances that have their own local attached, very fast storage. I can't remember the instance type names. I don't know. But there's various classes. I think the i3s are the examples that have very high storage speed. Networking. So this is kind of like a classic example of debugging a network issue where one instance in one subnet can't ping another. And they're asking for 2 possible reasons for that. Well, is it a routing table issue, a security group? Well, security group is a definite possibility. So that's definitely one of the answers. It shouldn't be anything to do with IAM roles, because that's not related to network traffic. And then the NACL on the subnet feed is not allowed outbound ICMP. I suspect that's the other correct answer. Because I don't think you'd have a problem with the routing tables, because I think if they're in the same VPC, they kind of inherit the ability to talk to every other subnet in the same VPC, and I don't know whether you can break that or not. Possibly. So my impression, this is a bit small, but I took the practice test of 20 questions. The answers on the right, so you actually, with these practice tests, you get like an email very quickly afterwards that gives you your results and the breakdown of these sections and how you did. Well, I got 80% in the practice test, but 33% in networking. Clearly not my strong point, DNS and so on. So I thought it might be a bit iffy. I took this, I'd not necessarily pass it. Lots of questions about tuning infrastructure and needing to understand things like, well, exactly what happens when a multi-AZ IDS instance fails over and the details of that kind of thing. So it's much more on that operational side of things, and that's really not my background. I might still study for this one because I'm interested in learning a bit more about these things that are a gap in my knowledge, and I'm certainly interested in possibly one day taking the DevOps certification, but we'll see. So moving on to the professional certifications. Now here, this is just from me reading about them. I don't have any experience of them yet. It's probably my intention to study for this one next year, because when my Solutions Architect Associate comes up for renewal, I'll probably study for professional, but it's definitely harder. By some counts, it's the hardest of the AWS certifications to obtain, and it definitely requires a much deeper understanding of AWS. And the questions, as we'll see, get a lot more complicated, and just reading the questions is going to take you a long time to read and pass through them. So the breakdown, it's kind of all split up again. I don't know how useful these really are. That's an example question. And they're not all like this, but this is fairly typical of the level of detail. I don't expect you to read this, but in this case, I'll just kind of summarize it, what it's about. So it's talking about SSL and how do you secure your SSL private key. And also, additionally, kind of related but not related, they're also asking about how do you ensure that employees can access your encrypted logs in a secure way. So there's kind of two questions in one in this, and then you're looking for the answer that matches both of those in a sensible way. So the key here is you have to know that Cloud HSM is a thing. Cloud HSM is Cloud Hardware Security Module, and I knew it existed, and I knew it existed for the purpose of generating keys. What I didn't know is that you could use it to offload your SSL decryption to. So this is where this comes in, that the correct answers are the ones that talk about offloading your SSL to Cloud HSM, because then you don't have to worry about storing your private key anywhere, because it's all managed within Cloud HSM. And then additionally for the logs, the answer is write them to an S3 bucket with server-side encryption. That's a private bucket, no one else can see it outside of your organization, and it's encrypted at rest. So I think the answer is C, probably. That's my guess, anyway.
It's always C.
Could be. That's key. So DevOps, again, a couple of years of experience. They expect you to come from either the developer or the sysops side of things. But there's no absolute requirement. You could take Solutions Architect Associate and then take the DevOps one. That's perfectly allowed. There's a focus on automation and continuous delivery here. In particular, the tools like CloudFormation, Beanstalk, OpsWorks, Code Deploy, Data Pipeline. Now, like some of these other certifications, it's somewhat out of date. So they don't talk at all about Lambdas, ECS, Code Deploy, Code Pipeline, the newer services that they've released, Code Commit and CodeStar and all this other good stuff that they've built more recently. So you're going to have to more focus on the more traditional tools that have been available for a while. Now, a lot of these, perhaps they're already revising them. I'm not aware that they have beta versions out for any of these other certifications yet, but they will continually revise them. It's probably 2 or 3 years, and given the pace of updates in AWS with new services seemingly being launched every week, then the certifications are always going to lag behind. So you can see the split here. Well, like half of it's continuous delivery and process automation. Well, I guess that's DevOps. Again, the questions are not brief. In this case, it's all about, and you probably can't read any of that, but it's asking you how do you get your EC2 instances to start up in, what do they say? I think they say 3 minutes or something. And really it's kind of a cheat that they give you an example of this breakdown, and some things, first thing takes 2 minutes, the second thing takes 4 minutes, the next 15, and then the last 1 minute. Well, you can only do 2 of those in 3 minutes. So those are probably the 2 that you can do at runtime, and the rest you need to bake into your AMI. And that's the answer. But you have to read all the way through this to actually answer that. So we do this ourselves. We use Packer to build AMIs, and we do things like install Chef from an RPM and things like that, especially anything that relies on external services. You want to pull in an RPM or something from a third party that's not in AWS, bake that into your AMI. You don't want to be trying to load that at runtime when you start up a new EC2 instance and you find someone else's site's down. It's the last thing you want to be doing. So in this case, they say, well, the application takes 15 minutes to install. Long time. Now, a bit about the specialty certifications. Again, I've not really looked into them too deeply, so I've just got a little bit of information on them. Networking specialty, they recommend 5 years of networking experience. And really the focus here is enterprise networks, and in particular hybrid enterprise networks, where you're spanning AWS and your own private network, and you have to ensure that the communication between the two is performant and secure, and that routing works, particularly for things like DNS. So an example question might be, well, how many direct connect links do you need to support this level of traffic? Big data, they recommend you should have a bunch of data analytics experience, and they split it down into things like collection, storage, S3, processing, analysis, Redshift, visualization, QuickSight, security. So, and then they promote like the different AWS services that match into those areas. Things like EMR, data pipeline. Again, this is a little bit out of date in a few areas, but you can see there's Kinesis in there, so it's relatively up to date because Kinesis is a fairly modern system. They definitely promote Redshift very heavily in this. But they're not going to talk about things like S3 Select that was launched last year at reInvent because that's too new to be covered yet. Now security, this is the second time they've had security in beta. The first time they had it, a bunch of people took it and they decided, we don't really like it, so they scrapped it and they're trying again. So this one's in beta until March, and then if they like it this time, they'll release it and you'll be able to take it. The key areas seem to be, based on feedback from people who've taken this, networking, security groups and MACLs, and when you use one versus the other, encryption, obviously a huge thing, auditing, and how do you do like avoid denial of service and intrusion detection. So how do you, well, do you have a question?
So for the going back to the big data certification,
Yeah.
So do we need to get any other certification to get the big data? Or?
For the specialty ones, you need to have an associate certification. So you'd need any one of those 3 associate certifications to be able to take any of the specialties. Now, how do you prepare for this? Well, there's a bunch of different options. One of the most obvious options is just explore AWS. I mean, anyone can sign up for an account. Sure, it can cost you a little bit of money, but then you have to be careful that if you launch some things, you delete them and make sure you delete absolutely everything that was created, because sometimes you'll launch one service and it will create 5 others behind the scenes. And If you don't clean everything up, you'll get a bill for 5 cents a month later. It's worth checking the pricing page. A lot of services have free tiers. Some of them are just free tiers for the first year after you create an account. Some of them are permanent free tiers that allow you, say, 1,000 or 10,000 or even 1,000,000 requests without paying anything. Some of them are quite high levels. You really have to use them quite a lot to get paid, to bill for anything. But then you might also get like data ingress, outgress, like costs as well. And it can, it's easy to incur small bills from AWS. It's also possible to incur quite large bills if you're not careful. So I would recommend that you look at the sort of the billing pages as you use the service. Like, well, I used it yesterday. If I suddenly got a $100 bill, if so, I'm going to go in and shut everything off. But it's still a great way to learn services. Just pick a new service and try it out. Now, the documentation is pretty comprehensive. The developer documentation often contains little tutorials, things you can try out for yourself. The FAQs are huge here. In the exam preparation, they'll say, well, you should read these facts for these services to study for this. And a lot of the answers for the questions are in the FAQs. So you really need to read those before. It's probably the best thing to revise just before an exam is to read through some of those. There's also white papers that cover a lot of different use cases. One they recommend a lot is this AWS Architecting for the Cloud, AWS Best Practices, where they talk about the principles of elasticity and things like that. And then the AWS blog, not necessarily a great resource for studying for the certifications because this is all the new stuff coming out. But if you want to stay up to date with what's going on in AWS, the various blogs they have are a great way of learning about the new services. You have Jeff Barr posting about every new service he's trying out. There are a bunch of books. Now, the AWS Certified Solutions Architect is actually the main resource I used for studying for that exam. Now, this is for the old exam, so it's good till August, and at that point, it's basically a doorstop. But it includes a bunch of practice questions, some online resources, practice tests, and I found it pretty good, pretty comprehensive. Covers a lot of those systems like Storage Gateway that I hadn't ever used, and it was reasonably easy going. There's a SysOps Administrator one that was published just last year, so that's pretty up to date. So I expect that to be pretty well in line with that if you're studying for the SysOps side of things. And then the Advanced Networking one is due out in March. So they're clearly still interested in publishing some of these books, but they only have these 3, so they've not ever published a developer one. So it's a bit inconsistent. But if you're going for the networking one, that's probably a good book. And then there's training of all kinds. So AWS promotes various classroom training, typically like 3, that's 5 days in a classroom, or an online classroom, hands-on labs provided by partners they have. These are pricey. You're talking like thousands of dollars for these training courses. Online options, a Cloud Guru, which those training courses are also available by Udemy. Those are a lot less expensive. I would warn you though that if you go through those exercises, you're typically going to need your own AWS account and you may incur additional expenses from going through those labs. So the same thing as applies as before. If you spin up some services, make sure you tear them down again or you're going to get a bigger bill than you thought you would. They may give you estimates about how much this lab's going to cost you, but if you leave it running, it's going to cost you a lot more. Quick Labs is an interesting option because here you take the training and they create an AWS account specifically for you for doing that individual course. And these are like short things that are perhaps an hour or 2. And then it just has permission to do that exercise. And then they just tear down that account at the end of it. So the price you pay includes the cost of any AWS resources you use during the training, so you know exactly what it's going to cost. The downside of Quick Labs is it only covers a certain number of the AWS services that you need to learn about. So it's good for those. It's perhaps a little more pricey, but at least you know what exactly you're going to be paying.
Andrew? I will say with Quick Labs, between the two, Cloud Guru and Quick Labs, I had a lot of success with like doing both of them together. But with Quick Labs, I did hear that there were some people that had billing issues.
Alright.
So it might be good to know that going into it.
Right.
I did not, but like I said, I may be in the minority with that, so.
So that was that billing issues with their credits?
Like, I signed up for a subscription, but I only did it for 1 month because it was cheaper because I did a ton of different labs.
Sure.
And I heard that they kept billing people every
Okay.
month, but I did not have that issue. So it is just something to consider if you want to go take that option.
Yeah, and Quick Labs also offers training for the Google Cloud Platform, and a Cloud Guru has a bunch of other training as well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the ones offered by AWS are all much more AWS specific. And then the practice exams. On the face of it, $20 for 20 questions doesn't sound like a great deal, especially with, like, some of them are very brief questions. But the real benefit here is they're using exactly the same software you'll be taking the test in, same platform. Some of the questions are exactly the same. It's out of the same pool of questions. So you may do the practice exam and then get the same question in your real exam. So it gives you that confidence to know whether, you're familiar with the format, get over some nerves about doing that, and you get an instant pass-fail result in an email with that breakdown by domain, as you saw in my example from the SysOps one. As for taking the exams, I don't know how many people have taken one of these, but you need to go through the AWS training portal to create a certification account, which is in another portal, but the two link together. You'll find if you go through this, it's all a series of linked portals that are some of them not so well linked. If you're an Amazon Partner Network member, it's probably best if you start in the APN portal, create a training account from there, and then create a certification account in the hope that eventually your certification will bounce back through and will be credited to your APN account. You can use an existing AWS account, Amazon account, like Amazon.com. So you can use that Amazon.com account to create this, the same as you can with AWS. You just go in, select the certification, language and location. There's a bunch of places you can take the certifications around here. The place I took the last two was just down the road from here, 5 minutes away. PSI, run that one. They cost $100 for the practitioner, $150 for the associate, and $300 for the professional. And renewal ones, I think, are about half the price. The actual test centers, the ones around here at least, are all run by PSI, and you'll probably be the only person taking an AWS certification there. Everyone else is taking some different certification, all kinds of different things. So you'll be at one desk taking this, and they'll be taking whatever, perhaps with headphones on, or whatever it is they're taking. You'll be asked to empty absolutely everything from your pockets. You can't have tissues in your pockets. Depending how paranoid they are, they might be checking your hands to make sure you didn't write over yourself. And they'll keep reminding you of it while you're waiting to go in. And you'll have your possessions locked in a little bag. At least the one I went to, they put on the back of your chair and then you get to unlock it at the end. So don't take anything in you really care about or anything too big. But it's fine. I mean, you go in, you sit down, you work your way through the test. So the actual test, first thing, make sure it's your name on the test and it's the right test. You'll be asked to agree to an NDA to not talk about the exam. You'll read the questions carefully. I mean, you've got plenty of time, I found, for the ones I've taken so far. Now, that may not be true of those professional ones where the questions are this long. I believe you can mark a question and go back to it. I tended to just keep going and make sure I just put down an answer, even if I didn't know, and just go through. And there's a timer in the top right counting down. It gives you a 15-minute warning if you get to that point. Annoyingly, there's a questionnaire. You answer the last question, and then they start asking you a questionnaire about, how did you like the testing center? Are you going to take any more certifications? And then finally, when you've finished that, they give you a result. The question is kind of a tease. You'll get a pass-fail result immediately, or at least you used to in some of these. I'm not sure whether that's still true of the new Solutions Architect one, but you will then get an email soon after that gives you your more detailed results, that breakdown. So I found certainly by the time I got my phone back out of the locked bag and turned it back on, because you got to turn it off, I had the results in the email telling me the breakdown of exactly what percentage I got and how I did it in different areas. So that's kind of nice. You get that feedback very quickly. Now, if you take one of their beta exams, you can be waiting 3 months to get your result. So I'd avoid that generally. In terms of benefits, what does this give you? Well, from the certification portal, and this takes a few days before this gets processed and comes through, well, you get a certification certificate. I know some people like to print out certificates and put them on the wall. Not really my thing, but you get a digital badge, as you can see I put at the start of my presentation, and that's one of these digital badges where your certification is baked into it, so it proves that it's your certification and not just an image that you copied from somewhere. You can create a public transcript to share your certifications, so this is probably a useful option if you're applying for jobs and you want to prove that you really have those certifications, because you can share that link with someone and say, well, here's the record of the certifications I've got. A really great benefit is if you've taken one associate exam, or you get a credit for another practice exam. So that's what I kind of did with, after I took my first one, I had a credit for a practice exam, I used that for the next one, and then took that and then took the next practice exam, so that's kind of nice. And access to the AWS Certified Store, which is yet another portal you have to register for. Once you've claimed your code for that, it expires after a while and you lose access to the store. And there's about 5 items you can get as an associate level. They're not cheap, you're still paying for them. None of them are very special, so I wouldn't bother. Unless they've updated it, but if you're an Amazon partner network like we are, then hopefully your certification goes back to that and you get credited as a company for having those certifications. Like Dave mentioned at the start, it's kind of a requirement for the different partner levels to have a certain number of certifications. So we're currently at the standard level, and for that you just require 2 associate certifications. There is a more basic level that anyone can just join without any, but to really start getting into the benefits of the partnership, you need to at least be at the standard level. Then you go up to the advanced level, and you need 2 professional and 4 associate. In Premier, you need 8 professional and 20 associate. Once you get to these higher levels, really, the certifications are the easy part of it. There's much bigger requirements in terms of how much revenue you're directing towards AWS from the people you work with that are much probably harder to achieve than these certification counts. And that's it. So, any questions people have, or anyone want to share experiences if they've got certified or training for certifications?
Would you recommend that first entry level one to kind of get your feet wet through the entire process if you're starting this brand new? Like I don't do anything with AWS other than the stuff I've kind of piddled with you, like in day to day. So would you even recommend, if you are a developer and you've got